No matter what, we come together for the good of our constituents, and I'm proud and honored to lead the People's House of the New York State Legislature.
The health and protection of the human beings that live in our districts is our responsibility.
Frederick Douglass's words for us today, I quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress."
If you want equity to happen, then this is where it happens.
All of us have a responsibility to the greater good.
The House will come to order.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Joining me today is Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz, who represents the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx, and we're going to be talking about some end-of-session priorities coming up. The end of session is approaching very quickly, and joining me now is Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz. Good to see you.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
You know what? Life's great.
Springtime in Albany, gotta love it, right? So speaking of that, springtime marks the end of session. The budget's done, so now it's time to move on to other legislative priorities. There's a whole hundreds and hundreds of bills, maybe thousands of bills, that need to come out and get passed in the next few weeks. Let's talk about some of your end of session priorities. What's on your list?
Well, I pick bills that are very tough to do, but well worth doing, and sometimes it takes a little time, but the number one bill, in my opinion, is the Climate Change Superfund Act. We're doing some good environmental bills this legislative session. The Assembly is about to pass an expansion of the bottle law. We're passing legislation dealing with diminishing the use of plastics. But the Climate Change Superfund law would truly be perhaps one of the most transformative bills that we've passed on the environment in a very long time. And if we have any common sense, we will pass it because it will bring in $3 billion a year to fight climate change without raising taxes by even a penny. And the way it would do that is it would assess those companies that caused the climate change disaster in the first place, at least as far as New York is concerned, and those are mostly fossil fuel companies. And there's a quantifiable way to determine how much of the problem each company caused, and a certain number of these companies would be assessed a proportionate share of that $3 billion. Now you may think, that's a lot of money, $3 billion. Actually, no. The amount of money that we need to spend to protect us from the effects of climate change and to prevent future disasters is actually a large multiple of $3 billion. So asking the very companies that made the mess to help pay for part of the cost of fixing it, I don't think is asking too much. You know, not so many years ago, we went through a similar experience with tobacco companies. They caused massive damages. Tons of people were, died because of their use of tobacco. And during those years, tobacco companies first denied that cigarettes kill. They denied that they were the cause of the problem. And then it went on for many years. There was litigation. And ultimately, tobacco companies had to pay in huge amounts of money to the states. And we want to see something similar for New York in terms of climate change. So these companies, if I told you the numbers of the amount of money that these companies are making in profits, some of the oil companies are making in profits over $100 billion a year, not gross receipts, profits. They're profiting off of the deaths and the huge expenses that they are helping to cause for all the people in the state of New York and around the world for that matter. So this bill figures out a way to determine their proportionate share of the effects of their doing business in New York, and then simply charging them a fee. And the fee could be, out of $3 billion, if it's determined that a company is responsible for, say, 5%, 5% of $300 billion is $150 million. Again, a drop in the bucket for most of these companies, but it'll help do a lot of things that we need to do. Now, who would be against this? I guess the very companies that would be charged. I just received the other day a memo in opposition from I don't remember the exact name, but the Chemical Council, the companies that make various deadly chemicals that are related to fossil fuels and what goes into it and all that. So the business interests certainly are against it. And the claim they're going to make, and that they are making, is that this is going to raise prices for consumers. It's going to raise prices at the pump. And that's an unprovable claim and a false claim, because if some companies have to pay into this fund and others don't because they didn't cause as much damage, I suspect the companies that don't are not going to raise their prices, and the companies that do, therefore, won't be able to raise their prices, because we still have something in this country called competition. And so that's our contention. And in addition, prices at the pump, it's not determined by one company in the state of New York. It's sort of a global market, and it's much bigger than all of us. So, but it's a scare tactic. That's what's used. It's a scare tactic. And you know what? If we don't do this, consumers are going to pay the price in a different way. It may not be at the pump, but it'll be through taxes that have to pay for infrastructure changes, such as how to make sure our subways don't get flooded, how to make sure the borough of Manhattan isn't overrun by the water that surrounds it, and so on. And so if a relatively small number of companies have to cough up some money each year, that's a good thing, and it will not raise prices at the pump. So that's really high on the agenda, and if we can accomplish it, that would be amazing. I know that the governor has expressed some doubts about it, but we have to bring everybody together, and I'm going to work at that, whether we do it this session or in the future. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to keep fighting to get this done, because our future depends on it. And anybody should care, but certainly anybody who has children, grandchildren, hopes to have great-grandchildren in the future, should care about climate change.
Absolutely. Now, let's move on and talk about your legislation, which deals with human trafficking.
Well, as many people in the legislature know, it was my law, which was the first law against human trafficking in New York State, and we passed that. I can't believe it. It's 17 years ago now. It was signed into law in 2007. It created the crime of human trafficking, which previously was not defined in New York State law, and it set penalties for various acts of sex trafficking, of labor trafficking, and it was really it was innovative, and it was really served as a model for states around the country, and we've made a lot of additional changes in that area since then. But one thing we're trying to do is to allow victims or survivors of human trafficking to be able to sue the traffickers, the very traffickers who in essence enslaved them, and it would open up a one-year window to bring civil lawsuits, such as what we did with the Child Victims Act and the Adult Survivors Act. In addition, it would make changes in terms of the criminal statute of limitations to try to prosecute these human traffickers. And DAs have told us that they really, more often than not, it's impossible to prosecute them, the people who are engaged in these heinous acts, because the people don't come forward immediately. This is a very traumatizing thing to happen to people, and sometimes it's years later, after the statute of limitations, after there can no longer be prosecutions. And so the DAs very much want to see the law changed so that they can go after these horrible people. And I don't know who would be against this, other than human traffickers, of course. It seems to me to be a no-brainer. I think most of my legislation is no-brainers, meaning why would anybody oppose it? But this one in particular, I mean, we just got to do it. The Senate's doing it, and the Assembly must pass this by the end of the legislative session. And I'm sure if it does come to the floor, it will pass unanimously or close to unanimously. Very important.
Now, you have a public safety legislation also, which deals with red lights. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. This would increase the number of red light cameras in New York City and would also renew the law, which has to be renewed periodically. Red light cameras lower accidents and save lives at the intersections where there's a red light camera. The problem is, in the city of New York, there are only 150 throughout the entire city. And what the legislation would do is raise it to, I think it's 1325, so it would be like a 9-fold increase. But even with that, not even 10% of the intersections in the city would have these cameras. Now, I know for some people, they have like a knee-jerk reaction against this. I'm not sure why. You know, they'll say, oh, it's just a revenue raiser. And of course, the obvious answer is, well, it won't raise a penny if you don't run through red lights, potentially endangering people and possibly killing people. It's a public safety issue. It shouldn't be something that people react negatively to. Just drive carefully. None of us are perfect. I know I'm not when in driving, although I'm sure everybody would unanimously agree that I am an excellent driver. But this is just a safety measure. This is not about speeding. We've done other stuff about speeding. This is not about speeding. And I know some people say, oh, we already passed Sammy's Law this year, which gives New York City the right to lower their speed limit if it so chooses. So, and my answer is, well, is there a limit to how many things we can do to try to prevent little kids from being killed? And the answer is there shouldn't be a limit. So this legislation, if we pass it as is, would increase the number of red light cameras, and people would have to be careful, you know, drive a little more carefully. I got a red light camera ticket many years ago, one, on the West Side Highway. It was really annoying, actually. But the truth is, if the light was red, the light was red. Don't pass the red light. But on I guess the one good thing from the perspective of people who do pass the red lights is it's only a $50 fine, and it doesn't go on your driver's license, because it's actually similar to a parking ticket in the sense that there's no points or anything like that. It's really against the car, not so much against the driver. So I think we all have to be careful, but I hope that people think that it's important enough to try to save lives. Since Vision Zero under de Blasio, accidents, deaths have gone down. But since COVID, when things were looser and people were just like, going crazy on the road, driving deaths have gone up again, and that's terrible. So this might be one way to save some lives, and I am in favor of saving lives, and some people may not be in favor of saving lives, but I hope they will be.
We'll look forward to all these pieces of legislation coming to the floor soon. Like we said, we've only got a few weeks left, so
yep,
yeah, we'll get it done. Thank you so much for coming in and give us an update on all these great pieces of legislation that you sponsored. We've been speaking with Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz, who represents the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx. Thank you so much for joining us here on Assembly Update. We'll see you next time.